and take it away.
Right. Good. Kathy's on. Good.
Did you ladies want to give an introduction?
Oh,
Sure.
Francis.
Yep. Thank you, Liz. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining AARP New Hampshire sponsored program with the Creative Feast. Winter Soups, Comfort in a Bowl. My name is Frances Donahue, and I'm your host and a volunteer with AARP New Hampshire. Co-hosting today with me is my fellow volunteer, Kathy Hoey. Midwinter is the perfect time for comfort in a bowl. During this class, Chef Liz Barber of the Creative Feast will share her skills with you and answer your questions while preparing 2 delicious soup recipes. AARP has been promoting the health and well-being of older Americans for over 60 years. Here in New Hampshire, we strive to bring you informative, innovative, and fun virtual events like today's online cook-along demonstration as a means of connection and inclusion. Today's event is part of a series with the Creative Feast focusing on food and its impact on healthy living. AARP also has numerous free healthy living resources on its website, from staying fit to wellness and longevity, information on healthy eating, as well as staying sharp. There's something for everyone. Kathy will put a link in the chat. If you have any questions or comments during the session about AARP New Hampshire or the cooking demonstration, please put them in the chat. Kathy will be monitoring the chat so Liz can answer your cooking questions or comments, and Kathy can answer your AARP New Hampshire questions. We hope you enjoy this program. Liz, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, ladies, and welcome everybody to my virtual kitchen studio here in Hollis, New Hampshire. I'm pleased to have you all join me. It's been a great holiday season, and now we're headed into winter time here in New England and all across the country. So today we're going to be focusing on, I'm going to be talking about making a good stock. This is going to be one of the building blocks to a really good soup. We're going to make a chicken stock, and then we're going to go into a chicken and vegetable soup. And of course, you are welcome to cook along with me or follow along, and this will be recorded so that you can see it at the end. But first, before we get going, I'm going to take you to my website where you can find the recipes. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Oh, ladies, I need the ability to share my screen if that's possible. I think that's something we should have checked first, so I apologize. All right.
You should be able to share.
I think you need to do Liz camera 1.
Yeah, I'm doing all 3.
Okay, let's see if that. Let me see if I can do that. There we go. All right. So here at the Creative Feast is my website, and you're welcome. You'll see all kinds of information there that you can check out. Also, you can see upcoming classes. If you go over to Food and Fun, that's where the recipe blog is. And there, what we'll do is, obviously, you can go right down scroll through and find all kinds of recipes. But the easiest way to find your recipes for today is if you go over to the right-hand side here and pick a category. And we're looking for soups and stews. And then here, as we scroll down, is going to be the recipes. Now, those of you who joined us today, you should have gotten the links for your recipes as well. But you can always come back to my website. Now, I'm going to be making a chicken stock, and you have the option of doing it with an Instant Pot when you are doing it on your own. Today I'm making it in a stovetop pot. So
Sometimes I
that's how
feel
I'm
like
going to be doing it,
Can you
but of course there are
minimize that a little
recipes here.
bit?
And then we're going to scroll on down to our recipe. Here's our chicken vegetable soup. And here's the recipe here for you. And then further on down is our stock recipe in a soup pot. So gives you all of that information. Now I'm going to leave it here for just a second because I do want to talk about making your homemade chicken stock and you know, all the kinds of ingredients that you have. So here I've got a sheet pan that kind of gives you an idea of some of the best parts of the chicken. Obviously, this is a whole chicken that has been broken up. And these are the ingredients that you'll be using to create your healthy broth. Notice that I do include in this the chicken feet. We have the wings, we have the legs. What we're really looking for to create the most collagen, the healthiest broth is joints, pieces of meat. So in other words, chicken feet have a lot of that wonderful collagen, gelatinous producing collagen. Also chicken wings are very good for that. And of course the joints here where the leg joins the thigh is excellent. If you have your chicken backs, that is a really great part of the chicken to include. And then of course you can also include the breast with the ribs. So this is a really ideal makeup of the ingredients, the parts of the chicken that you'll put into your stock. And so here's a picture of our chicken whole, and then of course with the extra feet. Now some grocery stores do sell the chicken feet separately. So if you have one locally, sometimes that's all I use. It's a really inexpensive way to get a real healthy gelatinous broth that's going to have lots of wonderful collagen in it. And then of course here we have our ingredients. I'm going to be breaking up our ingredients and we'll do that together and we'll create our stock right away. I did want to show you, this is here in my stock pot. And then very soon we're going to be talking about, you know, how to bring your stock up to a boil and to simmer. And so if you scroll on down, you see here that I show you what a boiling pot looks like versus what a simmering pot looks like. And that's going to make a big difference for you in the outcome, is going from boiling over to simmering. Again, another point that I'm going to bring up for you. And then look at this. This is the result of that wonderful healthy broth after I have strained it, refrigerated it, and you can see it literally stands on its own. And that tells you that this is an abundantly healthy broth. And that is all that wonderful gelatinous collagen that's going to give you so many healthy nutrients. So those are the things that I wanted you to be aware of. In addition, for those of you who would like to do chicken soup with matzo balls, I do have a recipe here that helps you with the matzo balls. And so that's a wonderful way to change out your chicken. And then look at this. This is my chicken soup after I've refrigerated it, after it was cooked, and it's almost a solid mass. Again, that thickening comes from all of the wonderful collagen. So lots for you to see there with regards to our broth. But right now we want to get started. So for those of you that are cooking the broth along with me, I'm going to put my ingredients for my chicken soup off to the side. And then I've got my broth ingredients ready here. So I do want to talk to you a little bit about the pot that you're going to use. We're going to be using an 8-quart soup pot. You can use a 12-quart if you'd like. I have both. I often make very large batches of chicken broth, but the 8-quart pot is plenty for you. You always want to be cooking with a good quality soup pot. But this is going to be a boiled broth. So, you know, we want to make sure that we have nice high sides and that, you know, you're using this. Now, you could also use a cast iron enamel coated pot if you'd like, but really a 8-quart is the minimum size that you want to be using. Now, here is, let me just grab a pan and I'll lay out what I'm going to be using for my chicken. So I went to the grocery store and on sale were chicken thighs and chicken legs. And so that's what I'm using today to make my chicken broth. if you are somebody who regularly, maybe you roast your own chicken, or you've purchased roasted chicken, you can use the bodies from that. So if you get roasted chicken and then you pick all the meat off, serve the chicken meat for something else, save those bones, pack them up into the freezer, and then you can be using those chicken carcasses from your roasted chicken to create a chicken broth. Typically, I'll use about 2 carcasses. I might add extra chicken to it, but those will give you a really wonderful, flavorful broth as well. So use your freezer for those kinds of ingredients. Now here, as I mentioned, I have my chicken drumsticks. I leave the fat, the skin on, because there's good quality fat underneath there, plus a little bit of collagen, and that will get into my broth. Once I strain out my broth, I'll pick the bones and I'll save the chicken meat and I'll use that in the soup, which you can be doing. These are bone-in chicken thighs. Remember, the bone of the chicken is going to be your key element that's going to give you that collagen and connective tissue that's going to add a lot of nutrients to your chicken broth. And of course, the flavor is going to come from the meat. So I leave the skin on. I'm using bone-in thighs, and I'm using my legs. Again, where the joints come together is where you're going to get most of that gelatinous collagen from. Okay, ladies, do we have any questions before I go on?
The only question is, they were asking what the second soup was. Is it a sausage stew?
I'm turning this into a chicken soup.
Okay, so there is only one winter soup. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
But we're doing a broth first as our building block, and then
Gotcha.
going into the next soup.
Got it.
So here we have, I'm going to go ahead and drop my chicken into my pot, and then we're going to talk about our vegetables. Now, when we're building our chicken stock, it's really important that we use aromatics to bring out the flavor, okay? Now, for those of us who are going to be cooking along with me into the chicken vegetable soup, you're going to be, I've recommended that if you don't have a homemade broth already, because you're going to be cooking one on the stove, you can use it Better Than Bouillon, which is the brand that I really like, as my broth. So I'm just going to set that aside. But in the creation of a broth from scratch, again, we want to make sure that we're using really good quality aromatics. And so we're going to use the holy trinity of aromatics. So we're going to be using an onion, we're going to be using a carrot, and we're going to be using celery. Okay, so the combination of these 3 are classic ingredients for your broth. Now, I have these all fresh, but I will let you know that in my freezer, I have a container of celery ends that I may not have used, or ends of onions that I may not have used. And those I store in my freezer so that when I go to make a broth, I just pull out that container. I've got onions, celery, and carrot parts already, and those can go into my broth without, I don't have to use a whole onion necessarily if I have quite a few of those ends. So just to give you an example of how we want to keep some of these fresh vegetables that we're using, store them into the freezer to be part of a broth. Now, I don't recommend that you use things like peppers or broccoli or something like that. For me, those are a little bit too strong. So I prefer not to use those. Some people like to use tomatoes. Just remember that then those tomatoes will be part of your broth and will color and flavor it in that regard. So what we're going to do here is, with our celery, I'm just cutting these into pieces. We don't have to dice this or anything. And these are going to go right into our soup pot. Okay. And then we're going to do our carrots. Now, I don't scrape my carrots. I just wash them if I'm going to be using it in a broth. So I'm just going to cut those up, and we're just going to cut those into pieces. You can cut them into large pieces if you want. And as we cut them, they're going to give us that opportunity again to get those aromatics out. Rather than putting in a whole carrot, you want to cut them into smaller pieces. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my onion. You could certainly keep the onion skin on. That will darken the broth a little bit, but you can keep that on if you'd like. I'm just going to take off the extra papery parts of the onion. I've often used leeks. If I have leftover leek leaves, I will keep those in the freezer and use those leek leaves to go into my broth. Now this is a great piece. I'm just going to take off this papery part. And then we're just going to cut these into large pieces like that, into thirds, and then they'll go in as well. Okay, so those are our vegetables in for our broth. You can keep an eye on that. And then we're going to add other ingredients that are going to help to bring out the flavor to make this a really rich, flavorful broth that we can use. So bay leaves is something that I always add into my broth. And then I'm going to add, I like to add my salt into my broth, and then that just helps my soups to be more flavorful right off the bat. So I'm going to use about a tablespoon of kosher salt. And I've got about 4 little peppercorns, but you can also use a few grinds of pepper if you'd like. And those go in. And then you can use fresh thyme. You can just throw the thyme right in with the stems. In this case, I have thyme that I have harvested from my garden and dried. So I'm going to use about a teaspoon of thyme. And then this is where you can use up a lot of the greens that you have. So these are the leaves from the celery, which had wonderful flavor. So I'm going to throw those in. And then I've got some parsley here with the stems. They can also go in, and those will also help to flavor. And that's it. That is the a simple way to bring really good flavor to a broth. Now we're going to go ahead and put this on the stove. And to this, we are going to add 12 cups of cold water. And so I want to talk to you about the importance of cold water, bringing this up to a boil and dropping it to a simmer. Before we do that, ladies, do we have any other questions?
Well, the question again was asked about, I guess on the sign up sheet or the website, it's said something about making a sausage stew with lentils or chicken and dumpling. Am I in the wrong class? They said. I Googled the sausage stew and it does say to register for this time. But I said you were making the broth first and then the soup, but I'd ask you again.
Yes.
And so I don't know.
So this was my mistake. I had 2 classes and confused them. But what I'd like to do is I'm going to continue on, and then I'm going to record the second class. And then how about if I send that to you ladies at AARP?
Sounds good.
And then you can send that out.
Okay.
Now, sometimes things like this happen, especially coming off of the holiday. I have multiple classes going along.
Things do happen, yeah.
But I think this is going to give you a real sense of where to start these, because again, your broth is going to be so critical to the success of your soups or stews. So let's do this. And then I want to talk to you. You said the second one was the chicken and dumplings.
Yeah.
So we can talk about that as well and get that going. So
can I ask one other quick question?
Sure.
Somebody asked the difference between bone broth and chicken broth from the bones. Is there a difference?
Yeah. So I think that there are a lot of confusing terms that the food industry uses to give you a sense of what is in the package that they're selling you, right? So a lot of in the grocery store, it might say bone broth. Now, depending on the manufacturer, you can certainly make a bone broth, which will be mostly all bones. But you should see what the manufacturer is making. Obviously, we are using chicken meat in this. What I like about this approach is that then I have the chicken meat that I can then put into my chicken recipe, okay? So into my chicken soup recipe. Now, the bone broth also, just make sure, you know, a beef bone broth is an excellent broth. That's what I often make for my beef bones. In that case, I do roast my beef bones first, which helps to, again, further bring out the flavor of the bones. Now, if you are using just chicken bones and chicken carcasses, I always like to recommend you add a teaspoon to a tablespoon of vinegar to the broth to help bring out it helps to leach out the bones, all the nutrients from the bones. So that is another option for you. So let's go ahead and get this onto the stove, and I'm going to add to that 12 cups of cold water here. Now, why am I adding cold water? I'm going to bring that right up to my highest setting on the stove. So when we're making a broth, I like to make a broth that is going to be a clear broth. And we want to start with cold water so that we're cooking all the vegetables and the meat all at the same time. We're going to bring that up to a boil. Once it comes to the boil, then we're going to go ahead and drop the temperature immediately to a simmer so that the broth is gently bubbling. The gentle bubbling of your broth for a long period of time will help to keep your broth from getting cloudy, which can be an issue, okay? So I just want to reiterate that in the preparation of a broth, you bring it up to a boil, and then drop it to a simmer and let it bubble slowly. Now, if you are making a soup, you will find that it's the same procedure. Bring it up to a boil and then drop it to a simmer and let it bubble slowly. And that way, again, you're not overcooking, you're not giving it too much movement in there that can make it cloudy, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and talk about our chicken soup. Now, if we were doing the chicken with dumplings, it would be similar. Let me just grab something here and pull this up. I'm just gonna grab that recipe for the chicken and dumplings. And there we go. Okay, so here we have our chicken and dumplings. So very similar to, let's just, you know, go very similar to the chicken soup, okay? And then for our dumplings, we're going to have flour, baking soda, sugar, a little bit of tarragon, butter, tablespoons of unsalted butter, and we're going to be using a large egg white. So this is going to be a very simple, almost like creating a batter. So let's get our soup started. And I'm going to go ahead and use my cast iron enamel pan. This got a lot of love in it, so it's got a dark bottom to it. Now we're going to go ahead and I'm going to get our vegetables ready for this. In my particular vegetable soup, and again, I apologize for the confusion, I'm going to be using some broccoli, some peas, and some spinach. I also, of course, I'm going to start with our aromatics. So let's go ahead and I'm going to cut up my onion. We're going to slice that in half, and then we're going to dice our onion. And this is going to be, we're going to saute these vegetables. Now, if you are using the Better Than Bouillon as your broth, we want to make sure that we're helping to instill more flavor into that. So if you're using your Better Than Bouillon, what I like to do is I like to simmer it a little bit with a little bit of thyme and a little bit of bay leaf, and that will help to bring out more flavor from a store-bought broth, either a chicken stock or you know, a bone broth, for example. So first of all, we want to get our onion slice. So notice here I've cut my onion in half, cut off the stem end, and now I'm just going to cut down to the root into thin slices and then cross cut. And that will give me my wonderful diced onion. Okay, and now here we go. We're going to do this again. Slice down to the root without going through the root. And then cut across. And there we go. So now we have our beautiful diced onion. And we're going to do the same with our celery. So here it's easier to work in smaller pieces. So we're just going to cut those in half and then cut this into strips, almost like if you were setting up for a crudité. And then we're going to cross cut. Into a nice, even dice. We want these to be small so that they're going to cook in the same amount of time. Now we're going to go ahead and turn on our stove, and I'm going to add a little bit of butter to our pan. Okay, so I'm going to add about 2 tablespoons of butter. If you prefer to use an olive oil, you can do that. We're going to add that in. And then at the same time, I'm going to go ahead and add in my onion and my celery, and then we'll go ahead and cut up our carrots. Okay, ladies, do we have any other questions?
Somebody asked, is there a difference between broth and stock? And go ahead, that's about it. Mostly it's all about this sausage stew thing that people got the ingredients for, but we're going to send it to them.
Yeah,
and they want to
yeah.
know if it's on site, the recipe.
Yeah, I believe it is, but again, your email confirmation will have the link to that, so that is available to you. Now, when I'm cutting up my carrots, I always like to remove the peel when I'm using it in the actual soup as opposed to in a stock. And then I save these peels and those ends of the onions. These will go into my batch into the freezer to help, that I can use in future broths or stock. So again, the question was the difference between a broth and a stock. I think it's a question of a language issue. So, what they are using to describe. I personally think of a stock as being something that has both the meat and the bones. And then of course, all of those wonderful aromatic vegetables that I want to be using. But that is, it's hard to differentiate when there's so many different words used to describe these different food items that we're purchasing. Whereas I think if you ask, before everybody was buying everything at the grocery store and people were making their own, ingredients themselves, a broth definitely would be a lighter, less intense flavor, whereas a stock has the that bone involved, which then helps to give you that really heartier, more comprehensive flavor. So that's how I would define it. But do check the ingredients on the items that you are purchasing, and those will help you to make a good broth or a good stock, commercially, or to use that. Well, as I mentioned earlier, what I like to do is I like to take that. Now, this is the Better Than Bouillon, for example. This is a paste that I like. I have used in place of a broth or a stock because maybe I didn't have time to make it. And then this can be combined with water and makes a wonderful flavor. But to intensify that flavor, I will simmer that separately with about a teaspoon of thyme and a few bay leaves. And that just brings it a much fresher flavor for what, when I'm using it for my recipe. So let's go ahead and add this in. We're going to add our carrots in. And just giving this a brief saute, again, to bring out those wonderful flavors, those wonderful sugars from our vegetables, okay? And here our pot is coming up to a simmer fairly soon. You can add a lid to that if you want to add more flavor to it. I'm going to go ahead and add our bay leaves and our thyme in there, and that should simmer for about 5 minutes. So let me just go ahead. I'm going to grab the ingredients here, and I'm going to make these dumplings on the fly for everyone so that I can at least finish what was promised. And again, I do apologize. So this is what happens with live TV sometimes. You're going to see how this is going to come together very quickly as I go into my pantry to grab my ingredients and pull this all together. So for the dumplings, we've got 2 cups of all-purpose flour. We've got a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. The recipe calls for a little sugar, so I'm going to grab just a teaspoon of sugar. This is a very simple dumpling recipe. We can use a little bit of dried tarragon. What I'm going to use is I'm going to use a little bit of dried dill, okay? And then we're going to use 3/4 of a cup of buttermilk. So I'm just going to grab that from the refrigerator. If you don't have buttermilk, but you have regular milk, take your 3/4 of a cup of regular milk and add a teaspoon of vinegar to it right now. And that will help to sour the milk, which is essentially what the buttermilk is for. Gives that contrast of flavor. And certainly if you don't have buttermilk and you really just want to use regular milk, go right ahead and do that. Now, I always recommend that you use a fuller fat milk, but in this case, you can use a low fat milk if that's what you have. If all you have is 1/2 and 1/2, go ahead and use that. If you have light cream, go ahead and use that. I don't think you're going to find too much of an issue with that. And then we've got 4 tablespoons of melted butter. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that. And then we're going to get this all going. I'm going to pop this right onto the stove. And we're going to go ahead and make our dumplings. So we're going to turn what was just a regular chicken soup into that chicken soup with dumplings. And you're going to see how easy it is to make a last minute adaptation. Now, we're going to start the soup in similar ways in that we've got everything in here kind of sauteing up. Now, this recipe also calls for 6 tablespoons of unbleached flour. So as soon as our vegetables cook up a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and add my flour to that. You can also plan to, if you wanted to add milk to this as the recipe calls for, I'm just going to use my regular chicken soup recipe, and we're going to see how this all comes out. So here we go. Let's go ahead and get our dumplings all set. So we're going to measure out.
Liz, can I ask one question?
Yeah.
If they use the Instapot for making the broth, what setting do they use it on? Was one of the questions.
Okay. Yep. Was there another one?
The other one is, do they put the pasta in with the chicken? If they use pasta in the soup, do they put it in with the everything else to cook up, or do they cook it separately and then put it in?
Okay, both very good questions. All right, so let me hold on. This is just cooking up beautifully here. So we don't want to brown our vegetables, just soften them up. All right, and so I'm going to go ahead and add in my broth. Okay.
There's also a
And-
couple of questions in the Q and A, Liz.
Yep.
Jan
So
would like,
let me just finish the other questions that I had. So there was a question about the Instant Pot. So your Instant Pot is always going to be set at the high setting. That's the that is the default setting, and it's just a question of how long you cook it for. So and all of those instructions are there for that. And what was the second question?
The second question was about pasta, about whether
Oh,
I cook
okay.
it separately or throw it in
Yeah.
with everything else.
Okay, good question. So I don't like to cook my pasta in with, if you're going to be using egg noodles with your soup, I don't like to cook it in with my soup because that reduces the amount of the broth significantly, because remember, your noodles absorb the broth. And the other thing is that as you store your chicken soup with noodles in it, those noodles will continue to absorb, and then your chicken soup will get thicker and thicker. So I like to cook my noodles separately, unless I'm going to, and then I just say I'm going to cook a pound of noodles and I'll cook them, and then I'll just put some noodles in the bottoms of my bowls. If you are planning to cook and eat your soup right away, you of course could cook your noodles in the last, 8 minutes within your soup, and then you're going to be serving it right away. So those were two options for you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep. And what was the other question?
So there are two other quick questions. One is, can you use salt and spices in place of the bouillon? I guess some people don't want to use the bouillon, but I would imagine if you use the chicken stock would be,
Right.
I don't know.
Good question. So say you wanted to make a vegetable soup and rather than a chicken vegetable soup, you can. There's also really great vegetable broths that you could use as well. But you may want to control the amount of salt that you put in it. So as many of us have discovered, broth can be, a store-bought broth can have a lot of sodium in that. So you may want to control that yourself.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there another question?
Well, everybody was wanting to get their recipe for the sausage stew. They have the ingredients list, but not the recipe on your website, apparently. So I haven't seen it, but I'm just saying, repeating it to you.
Okay. Let me, I will handle all of that immediately after we close out today. And I will make sure that everybody, that I send the link. And I'm going to do a separate video over the next 2 days that I can send to AARP, and they can send it all out. Does that sound okay?
Sounds great to me.
At
And
the
I've said
very
it a couple
least-
of different times. Yeah.
Yeah,
all
and at
good.
the very least, what I will do is I will post the link to make sure the recipes are posted, along with a link to the video.
That's even better. Yeah.
Even better, on my website. And that
Yeah.
way, when you look down the list, you'll see AARP soup class. How's that? I'll make it even simpler. And then I'll have everything right there for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she also said they don't have the chicken and dumpling recipe either on your website, but I'm sure you can add that one in as well. Yeah. The ingredients are there, but not the
This is
recipe.
just not my-
Whatever. Yeah.
This is just not my day.
Yeah. Things happen. Yeah.
Things happen, and I do appreciate it. We've had a few things happen on one end, and then a few things happen on another.
Well,
But I'll tell you
that's
what,
happens.
if
Yeah.
my goal is, if I make a mistake and it is my fault, which clearly today has been my mistake, I will make up for it in so many ways. You will all be clearly so happy. And
Good.
remember that the classes that we do through AARP are free and available to members at all times. So I'm really excited about that.
I know.
So,
It's great.
Okay, so
Thank you,
here-
Liz. And other
Yes.
people said, thank you very much for everything. They love your classes. So there you go.
you're all wonderful. Thank you. So let's go on with the dumplings, okay? Because right now, if we look on the stove, we have our broth is coming, still coming to the boil. And then I've got my my basic soup going here, right? So let's just talk about the dumplings. So in here are 2 cups of flour. I've added half a teaspoon of baking soda. I'm going to leave out the sugar. I know that with all of the flour, the carbohydrates, they're pretty high. Why would I leave out the sugar? It's just not something I have to have. So if I don't have to have it, I don't put it in, trying to keep as low carb as I can. And then I have a teaspoon of salt. I used a kosher salt. And then we have a teaspoon of dried tarragon. But as you see, I chopped up some dill, which will add a wonderful flavor to this. You could certainly add parsley if you prefer. You could do rosemary, whatever herb you have, you can chop that up and put it in here if you'd like. And then we're going to use, let's give that a quick stir. And then we're going to go ahead and get our buttermilk. For those of you, again, who don't have buttermilk, but you have regular milk, you can add a teaspoon of vinegar to that milk, and that will help to sour it. But if you don't have that and you just want to use regular milk, you could do that as well. So I'm going to measure out 3/4 of a cup of buttermilk. And that's going to add a nice complexity to our biscuits here, to our dumplings. All right. And so we, let's just get our dumplings. So we've stirred the flour, the baking soda, the salt, and the tarragon together. In a separate bowl, combine the buttermilk with the melted butter. So I've got my melted butter here. And let me grab a bowl. And we're going to add about 4 tablespoons of butter. And you can use unsalted butter or salted butter, whichever you have. And so we have that, and we're going to go ahead and add in our buttermilk and stir those together. Okay. And then we're going to add an egg white to that. So I'm going to go ahead and grab 1 egg, and we're going to whisk that in. And of course, save the egg yolk. I give the egg yolk to my dog, or I add them to my next batch of scrambled eggs. Okay, now you can see our chicken soup has come to a boil. I'm immediately dropping that down to a simmer as low as I can go. And that will slow it down and allow me to have more of a clear broth. All right, and then in goes my egg white. Okay, and then that goes into a little vessel there for my dog for later. And whisk that together. All right, and then we're going to add the buttermilk mixture to the flour mixture with a wooden spoon and incorporate it until smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and add this together. And then we're going to mix that together. Now, one other thing I want to do, let's just bring that together. And this is going to form our dumpling batter. And then we are going to drop this. And you can use a spoon, you could use just your hand. We're going to drop these into our soup. All right. And then cover and let the soup steam our dumplings. So this is super easy to do. All right. Very simple batter. All it comes together into a nice, perfect for dumplings. Okay. Now let's go ahead and add, I'm going to continue on with my vegetable soup. So I'm using frozen broccoli and some peas. All right. You can use any vegetables that you want. Note these are already cooked. I'm going to go ahead and add my chicken in. So this is cooked chicken thighs that I prepared earlier. And with your chicken stock or your broth, you can, what I often do is I will pick the bones after my broth has been cooked or stock has been cooked with the chicken meat. I'll strain it. I pull out all of the whole vegetables and I give them to my dog. And then I take the chicken off and I use that myself to make a chicken soup. I might stick it into the freezer and add that. We're going to add some spinach here. This is frozen spinach. Okay, again, I'm just looking for flavor. I love abundance in vegetables. And then we're going to go ahead and add some herbs to that before we add our dumplings. We want to make sure we get everything in there. Now, here go the top, those wonderful leaves from my celery. Okay, and then remember the dill that I put into the dumplings themselves. I'm going to go ahead and use this in my soup. You could use parsley if you wanted to. That would be a nice addition. And we're going to chop that up.
So can I ask my question,
Yeah.
Liz, is that, so you're putting all these veggies in the stew with the chicken, but to make the broth, are you then taking, did I hear you say you're taking all the vegetables out so you have the broth? Or
Well,
are you leaving them
here.
in for the soup?
Okay, good question. So let me just notice that my broth has come to a boil. So I'm just going to drop that down to a very low simmer.
Yeah.
In go these herbs. Now, we're going to go back to our stock idea. So here's my chicken stock. As you can see, I'm stirring that. So we're going to go ahead and let this cook for about an hour and a half. Now that is going to cook down all the vegetables. It's going to cook down the collagen. It's going to bring out all of those great nutrients from the bones. And then what we'll do is when my broth is done, I'll strain it. Obviously keep the broth, but then I pick through the stuff that's left over and I pull out the veggies and give them to my dog and I keep the chicken. By the time you're done cooking your stock, your vegetables are so overcooked that they'll make a big mush in a soup or something like that. So go over to soup, in this case, our chicken soup. I've got my broth, right? And I'm going to go ahead and add the broth alone and then restart the vegetables so that they're in my chicken soup. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Now, one last thing I realized as we were chatting is I used regular water in here with the intention of adding my better than bouillon. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in there because let's just pretend most of us don't have the time to make a broth. We want to use a really good, flavorful store-bought broth or stock. And so that's what I'm doing here. So now we've got that all set. We've got our vegetables in, we've got our herbs in, and now it's time to do our dumplings. So I'm going to go ahead and take my dumplings. Our soup has come back to a simmer, and I'm going to break my dumplings up and just drop them in right into our simmering soup. I'm going to take that down to a lighter simmer, not so much of a boil, more of a simmer, and just go ahead and put these wonderful dumplings right in like that. And they can be, you can shape them into perfect balls if you want. You can make it look very rustic. Either way, they're going to cook up in your simmering soup. And we're going to cover with a lid so that allows them to steam as well. So let's go ahead and finish that up. Got pretty much all of that in there. This really is one of the easiest recipes that you can do and get that wonderful homey feeling and flavor. Okay, and now we're going to go ahead and drop our lid on top, and that is going to steam our dumplings up for us to serve later. Now, We're
We
gonna
do
let
have one other question, which is about freezing the vegetables. So people say, ask the question about, could they use a freezer bag or do they need a container? And my question added is, do they need to cook the veggies before they freeze them?
Oh,
For the
okay.
soup later on, for the soup later on.
Okay, I think I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with what we're talking about. So,
Yeah.
okay, so here are, let me just pull this out. Okay, these are vegetable scraps, right? And say one night I'm making pasta and I have a little bit of leftover onion and I made, celery crudité and I have leftover greens or whatever. All of those leftover veggies that are onions, carrots, and celery, you could also do leeks, scallions, they're in those families. These little scraps, I might put them into a container like this, all right? And then this container is gonna go into my freezer with a lid, right? And then every time I have more scraps from onions, carrots, or celery, I'm gonna open up the freezer, open up this container, and drop those scraps in. And then one day I may say, oh, we just had a roasted chicken. I'm gonna take the carcass from the roasted chicken. We've eaten our wonderful chicken dinner. I'm gonna take that roasted carcass and I'm going to grab those frozen veggie things that I have in my freezer. I'm gonna put them together, put them in a pot with water, bay leaves, thyme, maybe a little bit of parsley, salt and pepper, and I'm gonna make a chicken broth. That's how easy it is to use up those scraps, to save those scraps, and then use for your chicken broth. I'm not gonna use these for my chicken soup or my chicken stew. I'm just gonna use them for my chicken broth. Okay, does that clarify that for you?
It's very helpful. I thank you very much. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
good. Yeah, and look, if you want to put it in a plastic bag, by all means, go ahead and do that. I think what I'm trying to get across really is that there's so many times that we throw out our vegetable ends. And then when it comes time to having a broth, we don't realize that a really good broth is really just a few scraps of vegetables left that are left over, and a leftover chicken that you're not using, and into the pot it goes. So it's really a lot simpler than we think it is. Okay,
Sounds
did
good.
you have
Yeah.
other questions?
I think that's pretty much it right now. Everybody's good and thanking you, of course. Yeah.
Oh, geez, well,
Yeah.
again,
Grace under
I-
pressure is what one said, which was great. Yeah.
right? Okay, and this is the thing. This is why whenever it happens, you smile, 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 and because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, I could tell you some horror stories. Would you like to hear one?
No.
No? Okay.
No. Well,
let
good
me-
things happen too. We stick with the good
Yeah.
things. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let me bring up my sausage stew and let's get on talk about that. Okay, because I do want to talk about that. So I will obviously post this for you, but here we have 8 Italian sweet sausages. Again, we start with the carrots, the onions, the celery. We're adding garlic to this, bay leaves. So doesn't this all sound familiar, right? This basic building block of flavor. And then you have a cup of green lentils. So let me just clarify for you the difference between green lentils and brown lentils. Brown lentils are the lentils that we typically think of when we think of lentil soup. But they're a little bit flatter than the green lentils. The green lentils are teeny tiny. They can be French lentils or something like that. And they literally are green versus brown. I like to use the green lentils in a stew like this because they hold their shape longer and they don't break down as much as the brown lentils do when you're cooking with them. So if you have the opportunity to buy yourself the green lentils, definitely do that. You'll find that they have more body to them. And then we have 4 cups of chicken stock. So now in here in my pot, I'm going to have about 10 cups or so of chicken stock when this is done. I take my chicken stock, I strain it, right? Remember, we took all those extra veggies, gave them to my dog, cut the chicken off and everything. And then I've got my stock. Then what I do is I let my stock sit on the counter at until it's room temperature. And then I'll keep it in a big bowl or something and put it into the refrigerator. When you let your stock refrigerate overnight, it does 2 things. Number one, any fat that's in it will rise to the top and you can literally just pull it right off. The other thing is that's when it gets nice and thick, which is really nice. And you can see how intense your nutrients and your flavor will be in that. And then you can divide it into, I like to divide my broth or my stock into 4-cup containers. Those plastic, let me just grab one. You know, I do a bunch of these. I put the lid on and then I label them. Don't fill it all the way to the top. Leave about an inch or so of space between the broth and the lid, because during the freezing process, the broth or the stock will literally kind of push up a little bit. And it could pop your lid off if you filled it all the way up to the top. Label it, pop it into your freezer, and then you have your chicken stock, you know, for future soups. So this calls for 4 cups of chicken stock. Again, I do recommend you could use the Better Than Bouillon as well if you don't have a chicken stock. And then it's got 2 medium red bliss potatoes, no need to take the skin off, and then some parsley, a little bit of lemon zest, and a tablespoon of Dijon mustard. So we're going to start the stew like you would your soup, and you're going to saute up those wonderful vegetables. First, we're going to do cook our sausages up. So you pierce them, the sausages, so that as they cook, the fat can run out, and you do want to cook them. So that's a great thing to do, to just pierce them so that that fat gets out, and then you can discard that fat if you want to. And you're just going to brown those sausages. And then you're going to remove them to a plate, and then you're going to prepare your stew very similar to the way we started our soup. Everything gets diced up so that it's the same size. You're going to saute it to bring out those aromatics. And then you're going to go ahead and add your vegetables, the bay leaves, and your lentils, your chicken stock, and then your diced potatoes. And then you're going to cook it with the goal of flavoring the stock with the vegetables and cooking the potatoes. The sausage then goes in at the end. Oh, and cooking the lentils, of course. And now you've got this wonderful stew, and then you're going to add your sausages. So as I promised, I will do this as a separate videotaped demonstration, and I bet you'll get a little bit more detail in that. So we've got just about 7 more minutes to go. I want to show you the dumplings where we're at so far. Did you have any other questions before I head over to the stove?
The only other question is about, can they use red lentils instead of the brown? That's it. I don't know lentils myself.
So yeah, I'm not an expert in lentils either, but those red lentils, again, I think that they are used most often to break down as opposed to staying whole. So the longer you cook them, the more they'll break down. Now, if you don't want to have a defined lentil that you're eating, then you could use the red lentil, but the red lentil will definitely break down. It's like the yellow lentils, the brown lentils. Any other questions?
No, somebody asked if they could use sweet potatoes, I suppose, instead of the lentils, but I know you're
no.
putting potatoes in, are you?
I think instead of the regular potatoes, the question is, could you use sweet potatoes, which would be lovely. I mean, I think they would actually be beautiful in this. So definitely you could do that, but I would peel them, of course. And then you could definitely add them in. I mean, you could use butternut squash instead of the potatoes if you would like to. So there's definitely, you can make those substitutions. Okay. All right. Let's just go ahead and take a real quick peek at our dumplings and see how that goes. So I'm going to open this up away from my camera and look at how these are lovely. So they're simmering away. And I'm going to go ahead and just for the fun of it, I'm going to take one out and we'll bring it over to my table and let these continue on and cut into that just so you can see what that dumpling looks like. And it's not fully cooked, but you can see that it has risen up. So we definitely want to cook it for another 4 minutes. But these dumplings are going to be absolutely delicious. And boy, whew, am I glad they came out. So, but you can see how beautiful that was. And the flour and everything got into the broth. So kind of helps it to thicken up just a little bit. So again, that's just simmering away and cooking up those dumplings. We need to give them the full 15 to 18 minutes in order to cook all the way through, and then they'll lighten up as they cook through. Now, doing the dumplings is not too different from doing the matzo balls, okay? So keep that in mind also. If you want to do a chicken soup with matzo balls, just keep your vegetables simple. I just do onion and carrots. I don't do celery in my chicken soup with matzo balls. And then you're going to make up the matzo meal according to the recipe on the canister. And then you're going to do exactly what I did there. You're going to go ahead and put the matzo balls into your soup, cover the soup, and let them rise, because matzo balls and dumplings, they're the same. They're all a type of dumpling. So we do need to have that lid on to give it the opportunity to steam and simmer up, okay? Also, I want to take you back. I do want to focus on our broth here, our stock. Now you guys have me using all different kinds of words for our stock. And so notice that the, let me see if I can get my camera in just a little bit closer here, that the stock is just gently bubbling here. Again, this will help me to have a broth that is very clear. Now, certainly throughout the cooking, you see how this is what they call the scum. I hate that word, but all of this stuff you can kind of begin to ladle off if you want. But I just let this cook for a good 1.5 to 3 hours, depending on how much flavor you want from that. It's really, every chef has a different cooking time for their stock. 1.5 hours for me is plenty. And then you can turn that off. But we want to make sure, again, that we bring it down to that similar simmer so that it continues to cook that way. And I think that's pretty much it. We are at 3:05 now. Do we have any other questions before we go?
One is, can you use split peas instead of the lentil? Split peas?
Yes. Yes, you can. Now, we're going into, we're getting into a dicey territory here, because we want to make sure that in the amount of time that your stew is going to be cooking, that those split peas will cook up, right? So, because we're referring to the lentil stew. So the cooking time on that lentil stew is about 10 minutes or so once you add the broth. So you will have to add more cooking time depending on what it is you're adding. So for example, you cannot add dried chickpeas to that because they take 45 minutes to cook in water, right? So I have not formally taken split peas in there, but split peas are split. So they take half as long to cook as whole dried peas would. So you can experiment with that, but just look at the cooking time. You're going to have to lengthen the cooking time in order to cook a more dense, dry pea or bean or lentil or something like that.
Thank you so
Okay.
much, Liz. I mean, two other quick questions is, one is, do you use garlic in your stock? Which I do, but I love garlic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, because I use garlic I'll use garlic in the recipe that I'm making it with. But, you know, just because I don't, like you, doesn't mean that
I
you
know, I love
can't.
it. Yeah.
You know, these are things you can do. I just like to do more, when I'm doing a stock, I like to do more of a purist way of doing it. And then I can add to whatever I'm using it in.
And then how many cups of water would you use to make a stock from a 12-pound turkey? Yeah, carcass, which I would say, I was going to answer 4 quarts, but I don't know. You have to, I would guess that you have to guess, right?
Yeah, because you've got to cover it. And are
Yeah.
we talking about just the
12-pound
carcass?
turkey is huge. Yeah.
Did you say just the carcass?
Yeah, just the carcass. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to guess here, I could be wrong, that you cooked a 12-pound turkey and all you have is the bones left. You froze those bones, right? That's what I'm thinking. So
Yeah.
if that were me, I would use a 12-quart soup pot. I would cut up that carcass so that it all fits in nicely. And then I would just cover it with water, and, you know, I would up my vegetables, because that's a good sized carcass.
Yeah.
I
Do
just
what you
can't
can.
visually.
Yeah.
I can't visually in my mind, but you may just have to increase your ingredients a little bit. But the key is, of course, is that you want to cover that
Yeah.
with water.
And then instead of using a pot, can you use a crock pot, which is what I use at home, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you can, but then, you know, you've got this long cooking opportunity too. So you'll have to take that into account. Yeah.
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 That
And
sounds great.
one last thing, making a stock in your Instant Pot, in other words, in a pressure cooker, will bring out even more flavor and even more nutrients under pressure than just cooking on the stove. Because as you can see, my pots on the stove are now steaming. So a lot of the nutrients are steaming right off, but in a crock pot or in a pressure cooker, it's keeping it inside. So,
Thank you
yeah.
so much, Liz. Really, it's just wonderful. Everything looks so delish. And, you know, there are a lot of questions today, but that's good. Yeah.
Well,
Look at
I
that.
think
Oh
I
my
think a lot of those questions were generated from my incompetence.
No,
today.
there's just one thing. And then, of course, we have the other things that come up. Anyway,
Good.
thank you so much, Liz, for this wonderful cook-along demonstration. These recipes look wonderful, and I certainly learned a lot. Today's cook-along demonstration is just one of the many virtual offerings through New Hampshire AARP and AARP, and we hope that you'll come back and join us for more. To learn all about New Hampshire AARP's virtual offerings, including coffee and conversations, gently yoga, educational webinars, and more cooking demonstrations, please visit us at www.aarp.org/New Hampshire. And if you are interested in volunteering for AARP New Hampshire Community Team, please contact us at newhampshireaarp@aarp.org. We will put a link in the chat. The next cook-along demonstration with Liz will focus on the delicious chef-inspired dessert sauces, which will take place on Tuesday, February 21st at 2 p.m. You can register for this cook-along demonstration on AARP New Hampshire website. And we want to thank you for joining us today, and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day and week. Thank you so much, Liz. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Oops, we have so many people today, which is great. Oh, look at that soup.
Makes you
Oh,
hungry,
boy.
doesn't it?